Cool. So this is going to be a conversation about financial modeling and version controlling your financial model. My name is Emilie and Chase. I'm an internal strategy consultant at GitLab. Today is October 9th, 2019. Chase, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Chase Wright. I'm the manager of financial planning and analysis here at GitLab.
Cool. Great. So go ahead. Why don't you talk about the problem that version controlling financial modeling would solve first, and then we can kind of talk about what some of the solutions could be.
Yeah. So I think it depends on the different approaches you're looking at when you think about people that use spreadsheet tools. There's two different ways to use it right now. So there's Excel, and then you have Google Sheets. That's pretty much the predominant spreadsheet software that people use. Excel, the good thing about Excel is that it is a file, so you're able to actually upload a file to Git and be able to version control it better than you could with Google Sheets, which is not necessarily a file, more of a web application. The benefit to being able to have a file system or a file that we can upload to Git, such as an XLS file, which is just an Excel file, is essentially being able to update, change, and then potentially do some other transactions on that specific file where needed. You could run automated testing, which there's a company out there called XL Wings that's starting to do that using GitLab. Mm-hmm. But the whole process is to be essentially use financial modeling with software development best practices. And I think that's where we need to get to. We shouldn't have V1, V2, V3 financial models out there. It should just be, hey, I'm checking this out. I'm going to work on it, create a different branch, and then merge it back in to the production branch. And that becomes a model that gets changed, and there's a way to track it.
So what does the existing sharing model of financial modeling look like?
Yeah, well, for GitLab's case, it's we use Google Sheets. So the good thing about Google Sheets, which is a little bit different than Excel, is that number one, it's a web application and it's really easy to share. So anybody that you want to be able to add, you just essentially add their email and then they have access to that specific web application. So that's super useful for collaborating, being able to give permission, or being able to build out permissioning really easily as well. In Google Sheets, you have edit rights, view rights, and then comment rights. You have that in Excel, but it's not as easy to do, essentially.
Have you used, I think it's called the Microsoft Share Drive?
Yes. So Microsoft Share Drive, I think it's a next iteration of what Microsoft SharePoint was.
Okay.
And the idea is that Microsoft SharePoint, you can upload any type of SharePoint or any type of Microsoft file, whether it be Excel, Docs, or PowerPoint, and then be able to update those files within SharePoint.
Okay, so is that akin to Dropbox in that it's essentially hosting the file in the cloud, or is it more like Google Sheets where there's one file?
It's both. Yeah, so it's both. So it's for storage, but then once you have it loaded there, it also serves as versioning as well.
Okay. So is there any versioning of the file in that shared drive instance, or is it kind of like Google Sheets where you can see the previous version, but it's more like an application?
If we're talking about Microsoft products specifically, it's been a while since I've worked in it, so it's probably been changed since then. But for Google Sheets, there is this notion of version control in Google Sheets, and you can actually name the version itself of a specific snapshot in time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really difficult to figure out what was changed. Like it's nice that it's there, but it's really difficult, like with a file that gets checked into Git, whether it be a Python script or SQL, so something like that, you can see what's been changed.
Yeah.
You can't see that
There's
in
no diff.
sheets. Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Give me a sense of like how many people at GitLab have edit access to this financial model, and then how many people might be working on something. Today we're 900 people. So how many people edit this? And then at a company of say 2,000 people, how many people might need the opportunity to edit this?
Yeah, good question. I'll answer it a couple of different ways. So like traditionally, you want less people in a model because there's more than likely like to be less mistakes potentially. The more people that you have in a model, especially when it comes to like auditing purposes, that's a little bit of a different story. But with regards to how it is right now, there's I think 3 people, me, the CFO, and then another financial analyst that has access, edit access to be able to update the financial model. Everybody in the company has view access, so they can view, and they have comment access as well. So if somebody wanted to change something, the workflow as essentially right now would be that they could actually add a comment to a specific cell if they wanted to see something or update it. I think ultimately, like where we want to be able to get to is that we start to create like different modules within a model, a financial model. So like, for example, like corporate finance would kind of own the long-term goals of what we want to be able to achieve, but then sales and sales operations would be able to own like the sales model, and they would have the long-term model or the long-term goals would essentially flow into a different piece of this model, and then sales could essentially create different inputs or parameters to be able to like forecast out like what that's going to look like based on the long-term goals. And same for everything else within a specific function as well. R&D, COGS, marketing.
Okay, so it's like if I'm understanding correctly, what you'd have is essentially a bunch of separate pieces, separate smaller models that feed into a master model.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. And so how is, like, I know we have the finance business partners who do some modeling on their own. Is that like the early stages of that today? Like, do those feed into the existing model, or should they?
So there's 2 different type of approaches there's multiple reasons you would have a financial model, but the way that we at least have it at GitLab right now is we've got a planning model, and essentially it's a bottoms up approach to where each of the finance business partners works with a specific functions operations team, so marketing ops, sales ops, and then build out the bottoms up approach on like what they need and what they want to be able to be successful for a specific period of time. All of that gets rolled up through all of it gets rolled up, and then we run it through a financial model to see how close that is, what that cost will be based on like what our long-term goals are. So okay. if it's over, then we say, well, we got to go back and revise something. So that's kind of a bottoms up approach. I think ideally we want to get to have that for planning, but I think we need a tops down approach where it's like, here's our long-term goals, here's our gearing ratios by each function. Like what does that give us? Like, are we able to predict out like what that is going to look like forward looking, and then tie that back to the bottoms up approach. And with a tops down approach, like you can quickly do scenario analysis and figure out, maybe if you have a bad quarter or a really good quarter, you're able to update that model really quickly to reforecast everything.
Okay.
Long term.
Yeah. So if I'm understanding correctly, there could be a case where, we have a gearing ratio that X, 3X Emily's means whatever. And then this quarter we surpass that. So we don't want to update the gearing ratio, but we might need to adjust the forecast based on the new inputs kind of thing.
Yeah, potentially. I think what we're going to find with gearing ratios, also known as business drivers, is that sometimes they're not going to be indicative of what we want to be able to plan as a company. They could be inputs or they could be outputs. But I think a long-term plan or a plan itself complements having business drivers, but some of those business drivers I think have to be really well defined and make sure that those are actual inputs that will drive the forward-looking plan. Okay.
So I know you've been digging into this idea of like version controlling the financial model right now. Tell me some of what you found.
Yeah, so working with the constraints that we have right now, Google Sheets is, because it's not a file itself, and because we have other Google Sheets or other web applications tied to other Google Sheets, it makes it really difficult to be able to version control a specific file and have a diff to see like what's changed.
Because I think sorry, just to make sure I understand, something could have changed in another file that is affecting the file you're looking at. Nothing on your file changed formulaic wise, right?
That's correct. Exactly right. So that's a problem that I think is more specific to Google Sheets. Another thing is like the diff, being able to see like the difference between two different files, and the functionality is there, but it's not good.
Let's talk about what a diff for a model looks like for a second. Is that what numbers changed or what formulas changed?
It would be what formulas changed.
So let's say we do live in a perfect world where...
Actually, let me rephrase that. I think it would be both.
Okay.
Yeah. It would have to be both. And I think that's where it differs. Like when we think about version control, as traditional version control, we're thinking about the file itself, not the data that is produced from the file.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a different kind of version control. So I'm glad I clarified. So in a world where what changes is that other sheet that's feeding into this sheet, and your numbers are different, you want to know what numbers are different, even though nothing in this formula, like no formula has changed on the sheet.
Exactly.
Okay. Cool. Thanks for letting me interrupt you. Go ahead, given the existing constraints, what you found.
Yeah, so that's more or less like the issues with Google Sheets. I think the next thing that which you find with a lot of big planning tools like Hyperion, Adaptive Insights, Anaplan, is that all of the data and stuff that they collect within the application itself is stored in a database, which is true to some degree with Google Sheets, but it's really difficult to do comparison on like what has changed effectively. So like this is a little bit different than a diff, like what a diff would be like with version control. It's like, hey, what did it look like 6 months ago, and what does it look like now, and like what's the variance. So I would say like that's kind of the constraints of Google Sheets. The constraints, I'm gonna flip a little bit and go to Sheet or Excel.
Yeah.
The constraints with Excel, especially like I think this is more in line with, or differs from like how we at GitLab think about things. Excel can become like, you lose transparency with Excel because it's a lot harder to share. Unless you have like some type of SharePoint site or something like that where you can upload it and everybody can have access to it. But It's harder to share, but the benefit is it's an actual file, so you can actually store that via version control. And it's not as great for collaboration either, because it is a file itself.
Yeah.
You're not going to get like an email alert when a comment is added to there.
So in this problem use case we're talking about, where sheet A feeds into sheet B, sheet A can get updated live and affect the numbers in sheet B right away. If you're using an Excel sheet, because it's not on the web, you can't have that, right?
You can, but it's not like, it doesn't work the same.
Okay.
Yeah. You can reference a different workbook, and as long as that workbook, I think, is in the same, as long as it's referenced to the same file path,
okay,
you can do it, but you have to like manually, or like have some type of mechanism that says, like, when this notebook is open, if anything's changed in that other notebook, just make sure to update it.
Manually check it. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So there's some sort of trigger to update. It's not auto updating on its own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
Got it. Okay, so we have this Jupyter Notebook demo. What are your general thoughts and feelings there?
So here's my general thoughts and feelings. I love the idea. I think it's really powerful, but I think where it falls short is you have to, with Jupyter Notebooks and being able to model it that way, you have to have good clean data. And in order to have good clean data, you have to have some type of data analyst or data engineering team to be able to support that. Which, when you're small, can become very expensive, and and at a bigger company, potentially you could sell it that way. But number one, you have to have clean data to be able to model it that way. Number two, you sort of take out the what you would think as like the classic end user from that part, because it becomes more of someone who has to know the Python packages like pandas or NumPy or something like that. You'll find that a lot of finance folks have that, but more than likely you'll find a lot of folks that don't have that skill set. So being able to bridge that gap with cleaning data, and then also making it really easy for people to say, I've been in finances, I've been working in spreadsheets this whole time, now I need to switch to like a different way of working in an application. Having that really easy for people to do, I think, is the biggest part. Otherwise, I think it would be pretty successful, because at that point you could modularize everything with all these different models and connect them.
What if we could abstract? So we talked about different verticals, right? Let's say strictly in the enterprise SaaS space, which is what GitLab is in. If we were to move into other enterprise SaaS space, would the formulas driving our financial model, like, could they copy paste?
Maybe some would, like gross margin. That's pretty much the same everywhere. I say it's pretty much the same. It's the same formula.
Okay.
But sales productivity, you're probably not going to have that in oil and gas. Maybe you will, but probably not. Like, that's probably not going to be a metric that's going to be really valuable.
Yeah.
So I think it's defining, like, at the core finance level, being able to have revenue, cost of goods sold, gross margin, operating expenses. Those will traditionally be the same, but when you start thinking about different metrics on like what investors think of and measuring, it's going to be totally different by industry. May not always be true, but it's really hard to compare oil and gas to an enterprise SaaS company.
Yeah. But what about enterprise SaaS to enterprise SaaS? Like, are the formulas and rules of thumb similar? Like,
there's probably enough similarities to, and I don't know like what the what the percentage of similarities would be, but it's probably in this case, probably greater than not.
Okay.
There's probably enough formulas that we could derive value out of, and then have an easier way to be able to tackle or build something that's specific to that company's business model.
Yeah. So what if the Jupyter Notebook example, the demo, if we could abstract away the like coding piece, right? Where maybe what you pulled up was just a web app with the gearing ratios as inputs that didn't require you to show any code, and then you hit run, and in the background it's producing the new numbers, and then when you hit save, you're version controlling the diff, or that creates a merge request or whatever it might be. I'm just thinking out loud here. Like, if we built something like that for GitLab and for our use case, could it also apply, say, to Meltano?
Yes, it could. And the reason is that using Jupyter Notebooks, you can essentially customize and write your own code, like where it like your business model doesn't meet like ours. And being able to have somebody be able to do that and understand that, like that's essentially what you would have to have.
So we could offer like a convention over configuration model where like these are the defaults that we're shipping with. But if you need to customize, you can customize for your company.
Exactly. Yes.
Following.
And the bigger planning tools like Anaplan and Adaptive Insight, that's exactly what they do. They have templates that you can get, like SaaS templates and financial industry templates, because more than likely you can build out like those business models to some degree, up to a certain percentage of like what it's going to be comparable to across the board for that industry.
Yeah.
And then have everything else customized. Now, if you give the power of the developer, or being able to give somebody the power to be able to code it themselves within like a really easy platform, I think would be the most valuable. Because what you run into is these proprietary tools like Adaptive or Anaplan. It doesn't make it easier for somebody to come in and become an expert. They have to know the system. It's proprietary. But if it's open source, well, then it's a different ballgame, because a Python developer in the finance industry is going to be a lot easier to find than an Anaplan expert.
So in these tools, it's not like bringing Python or Ruby or some conventional language to the table. It's like you have to be an Anaplan certified developer or something.
Yeah, for the folks that really like are truly into it, yes, because it's the same thing with Salesforce. Salesforce has its own language.
Yeah.
It's the same concept. Yeah.
Okay. That's good to know. So how much of the secret sauce of these things is the templates that ship with it?
I think it's probably, I don't know if it's the secret sauce, but like getting up and running, it's that the templates are probably pretty valuable to have. It's always easier to win, like when you first get something, because it's your vision is a lot more broad than like once you start working on specific use cases. And the more that you focus on those, the more problematic it becomes, because it's really difficult to solve every problem with a template.
Okay, cool. Any final thoughts? Anything else you want to mention?
No, I don't think so.
Cool. I'm going to end the recording now. Thanks.